What if the Bible you hold so dearly was deliberately edited to hide one of its most powerful books? For centuries, we've believed that the Bible as we know it is a complete record, a divinely ordered collection untouched and whole. But what if that belief is itself the first deception? What if one of the earliest, most mystical books of Genesis was removed, not because it was false, but because it revealed too much? For those who dare to look beneath the surface, there lies a text called the Book of Jubilees that dares to retell the story of creation, the fall of man, the flood, and the covenant. All from a divine perspective, radically different from the one you were taught. This book doesn't just echo Genesis, it rewrites it. It doesn't just complement the Bible, it challenges its very foundation. And that is precisely why it was banned. Known among scholars as the Little Genesis, the Book of Jubilees was once held in high esteem by early Jewish sects, particularly the Essenes of Qumran, the same mystics who preserved the Dead Sea Scrolls. It was seen not as a heresy, but as revelation. But as the Church tightened its control in the early centuries, Jubilees was quietly buried. The reason this book makes claims so startling, so system-threatening, that it could no longer be allowed to coexist with the emerging orthodoxy. You see, the Book of Jubilees recenters the entire biblical narrative. It paints time not as a random progression of years, but as a sacred pattern, a cosmic calendar ordained by angels. It portrays a universe governed not just by laws and commandments, but by celestial rhythms. It places Enoch, the mysterious figure briefly mentioned in Genesis, at the very heart of divine knowledge. And perhaps most dangerously, it suggests that humanity once had access to a purer, more ancient truth, before the institution of religion covered it with layers of doctrine. This version of the story, this older story, wasn't meant to disappear. It was silenced. Because if Jubilees remained in the hands of the faithful, it could have shattered the fragile wall the church built between heaven and earth. Imagine reading Genesis again only to discover that what you thought was the beginning was already a retelling. That there was another text, older, bolder, that called itself the true record of events as dictated by an angel of God to Moses on Mount Sinai. Yes, in the Book of Jubilees, Moses is not simply the receiver of laws, he's the listener of secrets. The angel reveals to him the divine version of the events in Genesis, explaining everything in Jubilees blocks of 49 years, 7 times 7, forming a cosmic rhythm encoded into time itself. In this light, Abraham becomes more than a patriarch. He becomes a figure chosen not merely to birth a nation, but to realign humanity with the divine calendar. Isaac is not just the heir of promise, he is a marker in sacred time. And Jacob, whose ladder once reached to the heavens, becomes the bearer of a secret lineage, one tied to angelic realms and celestial governance. You weren't meant to know that. The early church couldn't risk that knowledge spreading. Because Jubilees doesn't just reinterpret the past, it alters the present. It challenges the authority of those who defined canon and declared themselves the gatekeepers of divine truth. It removes the need for an intermediary. It whispers the knowledge has always been with you. It also poses dangerous questions about who has the right to dictate spiritual memory. Why, for example, was this book still considered scripture in Ethiopia for centuries, while the West buried it? Why did the Jewish mystics preserve it in desert caves while bishops in Rome declared it apocryphal, and perhaps most unsettling of all? What other sacred texts were buried alongside it? When you start to read the Book of Jubilees, something strange happens. You begin to see the familiar differently. The serpent in Eden. No longer just a tempter, but a force in a cosmic war. The flood, not just divine punishment, but a purification in a cycle that has repeated before. Even the 10 Commandments take on new meaning when you realize they're not isolated rules, but echoes of an eternal celestial order. Could it be that what we call Scripture is only a fragment? That the early church, in its quest for control, tore pages from the divine story pages that reveal not just laws, but maps of time prophecy and initiation? If so, the Book of Jubilees is not merely a banned book. It's a missing key. It suggests a time before the division of religion and mysticism, before the temple and the throne became rivals, before knowledge was hidden in vaults and forbidden to the masses. A time when a man on a mountain could hear angels speak and write it down. That book still exists, and you can still read it. But to understand why it was banned, you must first understand the kind of world it describes. A world where time is not linear, where angels dictate history, where memory is sacred, and where forgetting was the first sin. In this hidden version of Genesis, there are no coincidences. Every moment is part of a divine rhythm, every generation a note in the cosmic song, and every soul a spark returning to its source. No wonder they tried to erase it. But what if time, yes, time itself, was the first truth they buried? In the world of the Book of Jubilees, time is not a human construct. It is not measured by rulers or kings, nor does it bend to the wills of empires or institutions. Time, according to this lost scripture, is divine. It was created in harmony with the heavens set in motion by God and maintained by angels, beings who serve not just as messengers, but as the keepers of sacred chronology. And herein lies one of the most disruptive ideas in the entire book, the 364-day calendar. It may seem like a small detail, but this single number stands at the heart of a war over reality. The Book of Jubilees declares that the true divinely ordained year is made of 364 days perfectly divisible into weeks, months, seasons. It's neat, ordered, harmonious. A calendar of light. Compare that with the 365.25-day solar calendar we follow today, a system inherited from Babylon and Egypt, adjusted by Rome, and cemented by the Church. That extra quarter day might seem trivial, but for the writers of Jubilees, it was the seed of corruption. It represented a fall from cosmic alignment. The moment humanity deviated from the 364-day rhythm, it stepped out of sync with heaven itself. And so the Book of Jubilees begins its quiet rebellion. Every major event is timed within this sacred structure. The creation of Adam, the entrance of sin, the flood, the covenant, all of it happens. According to precise Jubilee cycles, 49-year spans, repeated in perfect order. The Exodus wasn't just liberation from Egypt, it was the reactivation of a divine time code. The giving of the law wasn't just legal, it was cosmological. But when the Church inherited Scripture, something changed. The sacred calendar was dropped, replaced, forgotten. And yet, why? Why remove something so precise, so foundational, unless it posed a threat? The answer lies in power. To control time is to control memory. To alter the calendar is to sever the people from the rhythm of heaven. When you no longer know when to celebrate the true Passover, the true Sabbath, the true Jubilee, you become dependent. On priests, on institutions, on a church that claims to know when holy time begins and ends. Jubilees whispers a different truth. You were meant to know it yourself. Imagine a world where every 7th year was a year of release, every 49th year a great restoration, debts forgiven, slaves freed, land returned. These were not just laws, they were sacred harmonics embedded in the structure of the cosmos. The Book of Jubilees insists that angels showed Moses this hidden calendar while he fasted on Mount Sinai. And not just any angels, the angel of the presence, the one who stands before God. This wasn't folklore. This was the original cosmic code. So why was this truth buried? Because it decentralizes control. It gives spiritual agency back to the people. It suggests that sacred time is not something dictated from a pulpit, but something woven into creation itself waiting to be remembered. And the Book of Jubilees remembers. More than that, it exposes how nations, by following foreign calendars, have drifted into chaos, how holy festivals have been misaligned, how the days of Noah returned not with giants or floods, but with forgetting. It's a grim prophecy. Jubilees states that when the people of God abandon the correct reckoning of time, they also abandon covenant. That disordered time leads to disordered hearts. That the erosion of divine cycles leads to moral collapse, spiritual blindness, and eventually enslavement. This was not just theory. The early church knew that the calendar they inherited had Roman roots. The Sabbath moved, festivals shifted, the new year became political, and so the church silenced the Book of Jubilees, because to keep it would be to acknowledge that the true rhythm of heaven had been broken. But the book remains, hidden in caves, preserved by desert mystics, revered in Ethiopia, where even today the ancient calendar is still honored in places untouched by Vatican decree. In these pages we glimpse what was lost: a map of divine time, a structure that orders the soul, a forgotten cadence that once told humanity not just when to live, but how. The calendar was never just a system. It was a portal, a way of syncing the microcosm of your life with the macrocosm of divine design. In every Sabbath kept on the right day, you stepped into alignment. In every Jubilee, you participated in a cosmic restoration. You weren't just keeping time. You were touching eternity. This is what they feared, because a people who live by divine rhythm do not live by fear. They are not manipulated by false urgency, false scarcity, or artificial laws. They are rooted, centered, awake. The Book of Jubilees was buried to keep humanity asleep. To remove it from canon was to cut the cord that connected heaven's clock to the heartbeat of earth. And perhaps, just perhaps, that's why you've always felt time moving too fast, too chaotic, as if something was missing, because something was. A rhythm, a harmony, a pulse that once echoed through every mountain, every star, every soul. The Book of Jubilees did not just tell a story. It told when that story truly happened and how to return to it. But to embrace that truth is to question the entire architecture of sacred time we've inherited. Are you ready for that? And yet perhaps the most dangerous truth of all lies not in time, but in a name, Enoch. You may remember him from a single line in Genesis. Enoch walked with God, and he was no more, for God took him. Mysterious, brief, almost forgettable, but not to the writers of the Book of Jubilees. To them, Enoch was everything. Not merely a righteous man, but a prophet, a priest, a scribe of heaven itself, a bridge between the divine and the human, a guardian of secrets passed down from the Watchers, those angels who once descended, revealed forbidden knowledge, and changed the fate of mankind. In Jubilees, Enoch's role is not peripheral, it is central. He is the first to learn the divine laws of time. He is the first to record the sacred calendar of the 364-day year. He is the first to write books of prophecy, meant for the last generation, our generation. And perhaps most disturbingly, he is the prototype of a priesthood that existed before the law of Moses. Do you see now why this was dangerous? The early church was building its foundation upon the Mosaic law upon Christ, as the new high priest upon apostolic succession. But what if there was a priesthood more ancient than Moses, more mysterious than Aaron, one based not on lineage or temple rites, but on direct communion with the angels? What if Enoch was part of that priesthood? And what if that priesthood never ended? The Book of Jubilees suggests just that. It describes Enoch as the first to learn writing not from men, but from heaven. He wrote on tablets, he recorded the movements of the stars, he deciphered the times of the feasts, he understood the heavenly order, and he preserved it for the righteous. In fact, Jubilees claims that everything Moses received was first written down by Enoch. This radically subverts the traditional hierarchy. It implies that the Torah, the prophets, and even the messianic expectations of Israel are not new revelations, but recoveries of what Enoch already knew. And it places Enoch above even Abraham. So why did the church reject this? Why not include Jubilees along with the Book of Enoch in the canon? Because Enoch represents something the church could never control. A man who bypassed institutions. A prophet who never died. A scribe whose books were never burned. He was living proof that divine wisdom did not require a priest, a temple, or even a church. It only required one thing: alignment. And Jubilees records that alignment in painful detail. Enoch lived in perfect harmony with the heavenly order. He observed the correct calendar. He kept the feasts on the right days. He knew when to fast, when to rest, when to rejoice. Not because a rabbi told him, but because the stars did. He was in every way a spiritual rebel, yet fully loyal to the will of God. But this is where the threat sharpens, because Enoch, as presented in Jubilees, begins to resemble someone else, someone we know from the Gospels, a man who wandered the wilderness, who challenged temple authority, who preached a kingdom not of this world, who healed, who taught, and who ascended without a trace of death, Jesus. Could it be that Jesus was not simply a new revelation, but the continuation of an ancient order? The Book of Jubilees subtly suggests that possibility, not by naming Jesus directly, but by elevating Enoch as a pattern, a foreshadowing, a model of divine human unity. This is spiritual dynamite. If Jesus is a successor to Enoch, not just a fulfillment of prophecy, but a revival of pre-Mosaic wisdom, then the church's entire framework must be rethought. No longer is salvation bound to institutions or rites. It becomes a matter of spiritual inheritance, of awakening to an older memory, and that memory was preserved by the very groups the church later declared heretical, the Essenes, the Gnostics, the mystics of Ethiopia. All kept alive the teachings of Enoch and Jubilees because they knew what was at stake. They knew the church was not erasing fables. It was erasing a lineage of awakened beings who walked with God not just in temples, but in the wilderness, on mountaintops, in secret caves, in silence. Jubilees even hints that this line would re-emerge before the end of days, that once again the spirit of Enoch would walk the earth, that the sons and daughters of light would remember the calendar, the feasts, the hidden names of God, and when they did, the veil would tear again. Not in a temple, but in the soul. No wonder the church buried it, because if Enoch is the root and Jesus is the branch, then you might be the fruit. A living testament to a wisdom older than Scripture, a soul aligned with a rhythm older than time, and a bearer of knowledge once deemed too dangerous to live. And now we arrive at a mystery even older than Enoch, a God who is not gentle, not abstract, but law-bound, holy, and terrifying in his order, a God of the mountain. In the Book of Jubilees, this God is not merely the familiar father figure from Sunday sermons. He is not the vague divine presence invoked in feel-good messages. No, this is a God who speaks through fire and shadow, whose laws are cosmic, whose judgment is exact, whose holiness is dangerous. And this is precisely the God that the early church sought to tame. Mount Sinai is central in Jubilees, not just as a historical event, but as a metaphysical fulcrum. It is on this sacred mountain that Moses receives not just laws, but a celestial record of history dictated by an angel of the divine presence. And this is no ordinary angel. He stands in the very face of God. He delivers not new commandments, but ancient ones echoing the order set in motion before the foundations of the world. This is a God of pre-creation law, of sacred time, of encoded cycles. In this telling, Sinai becomes the axis of cosmic memory, a place where eternity bends down to speak into time. And that God, the one who orders the stars, the seasons, the bloodlines, and the jubilees, is not negotiable. He is not the God of compromise. He does not ask for worship. He demands alignment. This is the divine the church feared. Why? Because this God is not mediated by a pulpit. He does not speak only through bishops or texts edited in councils. He speaks through patterns, feasts, angelic messengers, and sacred repetition. His justice is cosmic, not political. His holiness is not softened by sentimentality. It is otherworldly, radiant, and dangerous. The Book of Jubilees shows a God who acts swiftly against corruption, the angels who sinned punished, the giants born of forbidden unions erased, the people who defiled sacred times cut off. This is not metaphor. In Jubilees, justice is not symbolic, it is timed. Misalignment with sacred time is not just a mistake, it is rebellion. And rebellion in this worldview is the beginning of forgetting the first crack in the spiritual mirror. Jubilees records that humanity fell not just by eating fruit, but by stepping out of sync with divine rhythm. The first sin wasn't merely disobedience, it was disorder. And so the God of Jubilees gives the law as a cosmic recalibration, not as a burden, but as protection. The Torah becomes more than law, it becomes a map to remember Eden, to realign with the stars, to become whole again. But what happens when that law is cast aside? Jubilees predicts it. When sacred time is forgotten, festivals will fall out of alignment. When Sabbaths are ignored, the soul loses its balance. When Jubilees are dismissed, oppression returns. It's a slow unraveling of cosmic order and eventually of the human soul. This is why the early church could not allow Jubilees to remain in the canon. Because if this God, the God of fixed rhythms, angelic law, and eternal covenant, was proclaimed, then no church council could shift Sabbath to Sunday. No emperor could merge feasts with pagan festivals. No pope could rewrite the rhythm of time. The authority would lie not in Rome, but in the heavens. Jubilees dares to portray a God who doesn't evolve to match human preference, who doesn't dilute truth to please kings, who doesn't loosen the law to gain followers. This was spiritual rebellion against empire. It was a return to a vertical faith, a God-to-soul connection unfiltered, untamed. And even more dangerous, Jubilees suggests this God chose specific families, specific bloodlines, not arbitrarily, but cosmically. Abraham's covenant was not favoritism. It was a rethreading of humanity's connection to divine order. Isaac's birth was not just a miracle, it was perfectly timed. Jacob's dreams were not hallucinations, they were messages from the structure of the heavens themselves. To erase Jubilees was to erase the memory of divine selection, not to privilege one group over another, but to remind humanity that alignment always comes with precision. You cannot invent your own path to God. You must return to the path encoded since the beginning. But here's the paradox. This God of the mountain is not just strict. He is deeply personal. He reveals secrets. He gives prophecy. He instructs the angels. He weeps over humanity's forgetfulness. He doesn't demand worship to satisfy ego. He invites obedience so that souls may live in harmony. This is not legalism. This is celestial love expressed through law. But for an emerging church that was building bridges to Rome, to Hellenistic culture, to new converts across the empire, this God was too difficult, too exact, too dangerous. So the Book of Jubilees was silenced, and in its place a gentler God was presented. A God of abstract grace, disconnected from sacred time, detached from the rhythms of creation. A God who did not mind if the Sabbath moved. A God who would understand if his feasts were replaced. A God of adaptation. But the God of the mountain does not adapt. He waits, patiently, for his children to remember, to wake up, to hear again the pulse of the stars, and perhaps to climb that mountain once more. So we return now to the heart of the mystery, not just why the Book of Jubilees was banned, what that act of burial reveals about the soul of history. Because to erase a scripture is not merely to hide words, it is to break the chain of memory. The Book of Jubilees is not just a retelling of Genesis, it is a restoration of how humanity once remembered itself through time, through sacred repetition, through alignment with heaven. To remove it from canon was to fracture the rhythm of divine consciousness passed from age to age. And to silence it was to control the soul. Let us say that plainly. Jubilees was not removed because it was false. It was removed because it disempowered the system. It told you that time belonged not to emperors, but to God. It whispered that the calendar of the heavens still pulsed beneath your daily life. It pointed to Enoch not as legend, but as the blueprint for mystical awakening, one that bypassed priests, rites, even temples. And it introduced a God who was not made in the image of men, but who burned with holiness, order, and unshakable memory. In other words, Jubilees set you free. That's why it had to disappear. To build a religious empire, the church had to centralize control. It needed a clean, simple story, one that fit Roman time, Roman festivals, Roman hierarchies. A Jesus detached from Jewish time, a gospel without cosmic law. A scripture easily adapted, softened, expanded, and codified. Jubilees didn't allow that. Its very structure resisted it. Its insistence on exact dates, sacred years, and celestial feasts made it inflexible, too precise, too stubbornly eternal. And so it was labeled apocryphal, and yet it survived, buried but not broken, copied by hand generation after generation, by monks in Ethiopia, by mystics in the desert, by voices in shadows, preserved in the caves of Qumran. whispered in the schools of the Kabbalists, honored by the few who still listened to the pulse of the divine calendar. You may be hearing it now, a sound like memory returning, like forgotten light. And with that, a question begins to rise, not from your head, but from the ancient part of you that remembers what the world once was. What if you have been living in someone else's time? What if your soul still remembers the true calendar? Every missed Sabbath, every out-of-season festival, every distorted story, was it a veil, a spell, a forgetting? The Book of Jubilees doesn't condemn you. It simply calls you back to a pattern, back to a God who still speaks through cycles, not microphones. Back to a time when humanity did not just believe, but walked in rhythm with the heavens. Because the real purpose of Jubilees is not to judge, but to restore, to give you your place in the divine symphony. You are not a random being born in a random year. You are a note in a song that began before the stars were formed. A spark of light designed to appear exactly now in the final ages when memory begins to awaken. This is why the book ends not in the past, but with prophecy. It speaks of a generation that will remember, a people who will return to sacred time, a soul that will rise from forgetfulness like a dawn. And it hints quietly, powerfully, that the same angels who taught Enoch are waiting once more, waiting for the human soul to align, to rise, to remember. Perhaps that is you. And so we ask not with certainty, but with sacred curiosity, what else has been buried? What other scrolls, symbols, or songs lie hidden in caves, in dreams, in the silent spaces between your thoughts? And when you find them not in museums, but in your own memory, what will you do? The church may have hidden the Book of Jubilees, but it did not destroy it, because the truth when seated in the soul cannot die. It only sleeps, and now perhaps it begins to wake. Feel it, the pulse beneath the pulse, the time beneath the clock. The God not of doctrine, but of divine order. He calls you not to believe blindly, but to remember boldly, to realign, to return. And in that remembering to become